Rudolf Steiner. He was a polymath who lived in the years 1861 to 1925. He was the founder of Anthroposophy. This movement was a holistic enterprise aiming at the synthesis of spirituality, different areas of science, and other fields of cultural and artistic endeavor. He was extremely prolific. We now have access to over 350 collected volumes of his lectures and writings. Imagine. Steiner was an extremely gifted educator who applied his talents in the field of spiritual science. Spiritual science, or anthroposophy, is based on the notion that a human being, contrary to contemporary materialistic paradigms at the time, is not merely sense-bound and reducible to physical processes of a biological organism, but his inner nature of soul and spirit. For Steiner, this inner world can be explored and cultivated according to the methods of his spiritual science. That is to say, by developing organs of direct spiritual perception of inner realities. This is the essential task of anthroposophy, which in this universal human striving counts for the evolutionary process of human consciousness. Anthroposophy is a form of spiritual and scientific discipline adapted to the changes which came about in the course of history. One particular feature of this evolutionary process is the development of logical linear thinking and the concurrent crystallization of the I, of the sense of autonomy and self-agency of a human being. Steiner saw that as history progressed, human beings started to become more aware of their sense of individuality and independence. But this process is a double-edged sword, because as a result, we have also become split off from reality, both in an inner and outer sense. We have lost a sense of participation, say. Steiner's anthroposophy essentially seeks to address this predicament and attempts to answer the question of how can we preserve this hard-won achievement that is the I in such a way that through it we can reconnect to higher formative principles of the spiritual world. You can already see that this is not the I in the superficial sense of the superficial layer of the human personality, as in psychoanalysis, but the innermost core of one's nature, which can be consciously developed to navigate and participate in the spiritual world. So the I is the spiritual essence of a human being. The title of my talk, Pythagorean Education of the Soul, is a reference to the esoteric schooling system envisioned by Steiner. He conceived of the Pythagorean discipline as one of three paths that students could follow in order to develop their souls according to their natural affinity with artistic and scientific disciplines. By further immersion in meditative practices, practice of music, and sacred geometry, one could strengthen his soul forces, particularly the faculty of thinking, and transform it into the direct organ of perception of the spiritual world. Unfortunately, this Pythagorean path was only conceptually introduced and never realized due to the outbreak of World War I. Nevertheless, Steiner's work itself is deeply permeated by geometric and mathematical principles. His ideas on the evolution of the cosmos, the earth, the cycles of civilization, and the human being himself are witness to the Pythagorean nature of anthroposophy. In this presentation, I am going to look at Steiner's ideas related to the notion of evolution of consciousness and look at them through the lens of the Pythagorean discipline as I come to have understood it in my own thinking. First, I am going to briefly describe Steiner's architectonics of the cosmos, and then, in more detail, the notion of the Logos, the Christ, which stands for Steiner at the center of cosmic and personal evolution. I am also going to look for geometric consistency between different symbolic iterations of the Logos, as it appears in some of the epoch-defining works of art and architecture. Steiner was one of the most important thinkers to take up the topic of evolution of consciousness in 19th and 20th century. I should mention that his ideas in this respect reach not only to the time of what is conventionally regarded as the birth date of civilization, around 3000 BC, in the area of the Fertile Crescent, but beyond that, back to the spiritual principles responsible for the creation of the solar system. Steiner, as a true esotericist and a clairvoyant, describes a pantheon of spiritual beings and angelic forces that weave our solar system and describes its evolutionary metamorphoses. He gives account of the process, how out of the spiritual world matter crystallized, and how the present Earth conditions came about. Therefore, he gives us a glimpse not only into the historical process itself, but first and foremost, into the subtle spiritual background from which this process originates. I should also add that in the earliest phase of this process, the principle of the I is already present in its germinal form. The I gradually unfolds through the course of cosmic and earthly evolution, and eventually fully enters the stage as Christ appears on earth. His most comprehensive accounts of this may be found in a book, Esoteric Science and Outline. In this work, Steiner presents us with stages of cosmic evolution. As you can see on the screen, there are some of the blackboard drawings by Steiner. This cosmic metamorphosis is described in terms of 7 planetary stages of Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan. Each of the planets represents a stage of evolution of the solar system. The names of the planets, Saturn, Sun, and Moon, do not refer to the planets as we find them in their current physical form, but refer to their earlier manifestations of soul's spiritual nature, when their material form has not yet fully crystallized. I won't go into too much details regarding the entire process of metamorphosis of the cosmos. I would only like to point out that according to Steiner, the Earth stage, the fourth one, is the stage we are at now. The fourth in the cycle of 7 signifies for Steiner a pivot point. And this is a quotation from Steiner, in which he says, beginning with the Earth phase of evolution, the wisdom of the outer cosmos becomes inner wisdom in the human being. Internalized in this way, it becomes the seed of love. Wisdom is the prerequisite for love. Love is the result of wisdom that has been reborn in the I. That is to say, the process of crystallization of the I takes place. In the course of the Earth evolution, we see a gradual birth of the sense of individuality, of the self-conscious and autonomous I. This human innermost essence becomes the carrier for which the divine directly expresses itself. This process finds its culmination in what Steiner calls the mystery of Golgotha, that is 3 years of Christ's activity after the baptism in the Jordan River. It signifies the moment when the divine principle fully incarnated into the physical plane. Moreover, in this evolutionary progression, the mission of the Earth is very unique. Through Christ, the cosmos becomes transformed from the cosmos of wisdom to the cosmos of love. And again, this is a quotation from Steiner. The I in man is the same as Christ in the world. It is the turning point in the whole evolution of humanity. Everything that preceded Christ in the development of humanity was a preparation for the appearance of Christ. Everything that followed the appearance of Christ proceeded from it. Christ is the world's center. He is the Word who stands at the center of all development. Like rays, the whole development of humanity flows towards him, towards his embodiment. Steiner goes deeper into the idea of Christ as the center point of evolution in his work Christianity as a Mystical Fact. There he shows that religious symbolism from different cultures prefigures and prepares the way for the appearance of Christ. In this work, he covers a variety of traditions and philosophies to make this point. The mystery cults of Egypt, Greece, Plato, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Philo, Buddha, just to name a few. But there is an important point to make here. Steiner emphasizes the uniqueness and primacy of Christ's logos among these. Now I'm going to take symbolism of some of the above-mentioned figures and cultures and look at it through the lens of some of the geometric and mathematical principles and attempt to answer if Steiner's insight is valid. His statements regarding the nature of Christ are going to be scrutinized. So first, let's take a look at Egypt. The similarities between the god Osiris, the dying and resurrecting deity, and Christ have been noted by a variety of authors. Steiner, in Christianity as a Mystical Fact, also claims that Osiris prefigures Christ. He goes on to describe the initiation process in ancient Egypt, in which the soul of an initiate had to become inwardly united with the Osiris principle, so that it can realize its macrocosmic, that is logos-like nature. And Steiner uses the excerpts from the Book of the Dead to make this point. His reflections in my mind are on point, but there is a more compelling case to be made for the ancient Egyptian symbolism prefiguring the appearance of Christ. I am thinking here of its architectural wonder, namely the pyramids of Giza, which have embedded in them highly sophisticated scientific, astronomical, and religious principles. In collective consciousness, the pyramids of Giza have become synonymous with the Egyptian culture and stand as a testament to its greatness. I will only mention in passing that there is much controversy about its dating and purpose, which are extremely important issues, which we don't have much time to address fully. What is relevant for our discussion are its dimensions and proportions, which give up many secrets related to Christ and Osiris. So first, how are Osiris and the pyramids of Giza related? Osiris was regarded as the spiritual essence of the Great Pyramids. Osiris was regarded as the Ka of the Great Pyramids of Giza. And the idea of death and resurrection was central to the function of the pyramid. It was, among other things, the temple of initiation. So first, we should consider the name of the Great Pyramid. It was called by the Egyptians the Bull Mountain. Mythologically, this name refers to the Apis bull, which is a manifestation of Osiris. Apis, as Plutarch puts it, being the image of the soul of Osiris in a work on Isis and Osiris. Yes, on Isis and Osiris. In hieroglyphic writing, the apis is symbolized by two triangular shapes. Two triangular shapes, which is also the shape of the entrance to the Great Pyramid, as you can see on the slide. Later, in Semitic languages, apis was called aleph, also signifying oxen and yoke. And aleph is the first letter of Hebrew alphabet. And the original pictograph for this letter aleph is a picture of an ox head. And the Greek letter alpha is derived from the same root of aleph. An author, R.E. Witt, in his book Isis in the Greco-Roman World, cites a Christian tradition recorded by pseudo Clement that the golden calf sacrificed by the Israelites was made in the image of Apis, the sacred bull of the Egyptians. So we see that there is a direct continuity between Osiris as Apis, the Hebrew letter Aleph, and the Greek letter Alpha. Therefore, the Great Pyramid, known as the Bull Mountain, with its A-shaped entrance referring to the Apis bull, should be regarded as an essential part of a continuous tradition of conceiving of divinity in terms of symbolic alpha, because an early form of this symbol is already embedded in one of the earliest architectural achievements of the Egyptians and in the hieroglyphic writing. The Apis was related to the cow goddess Hathor as her son and lover, who impregnates her and later becomes reborn through her. In one of the inscriptions at the Hatshepsut temple, the Apis is described as a virile bull who impregnates vital cows, thereby establishing the limit of Hatshepsut herd. This mythological image indicates metaphysical principles of the limit and the unlimited, which come together to create the fabric of reality. Let's look closer at the symbolism at the temple of Dendera, dedicated to Hathor, particularly to the columns located in the main hall, each topped with the face of the goddess Hathor. There are layers of meaning related to this symbol. Among other things, it is shaped in the form of a womb carrying a child. But also, in the light of our reflections, it can be viewed as an early form of the Omega, as a counterpart to Apis, Aleph, and Alpha. The shape of the face of the goddess bears very close resemblance to this letter. Mythologically and metaphysically, there is a direct relationship between Apis and Hathor, which could have influenced later religious symbolism, particularly of Christ. I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end, as in Revelation. Just as Apis and Hathor, as a pair of related deities, express the same idea. Let's come back to the Great Pyramid to see whether we can find further proofs for Steiner's claim that the Egyptian spiritual principle of Osiris found its culmination in the figure of Christ. As we saw that Osiris was the spiritual principle of the Great Pyramids. Moving to the Pythagorean aspect of my presentation, let's consider its architecture. There are many ways to approach it. One of its amazing features is that it allows for multiple ways of calculation, which reveal its different secrets. By Pythagorean aspect, I mean a way of apprehending reality in terms of number, geometry, and music, which have a sacred significance. That is, they are imaginal archetypal principles through which the logos, the pattern of reality, is disclosed to us. These numbers are not merely computationally derived abstractions, but formative forces of reality inherent to the harmony of the cosmos. The universe is mathematical and geometric, and this is a sign of the divine nature of all creation to the Pythagorean spirit. The Pythagorean spiritual discipline involves awakening to these mathematical principles. The more the works of art, science, architecture conform to these patterns, the more they approach the Pythagorean ideal. In that way, they are able to awaken human soul to this universal harmony. When we consider the measurements of the Great Pyramid, conventionally named after the pharaoh of Khufu, we must first deal with a staggering fact, namely, the units of measure used to construct it. If we take, for example, a meter to measure its dimensions, are we not using units of measure invented by the French in the 18th century by measuring 1/10,000,000th part, 1/2 of length of a meridian, and therefore projecting a modern system of measure onto this ancient structure? What about the foot in the royal biblical cubit? In fact, those three units of measure, the meter, the royal biblical cubit, and the foot, are embedded into the height, base, diagonal, corner, and side slope length ratios of the Great Pyramid. Probably stand up, explain it a bit. When you take the diagonal, here, the base, the half base, and side slope, and you add it together, you arrive at the value of 1638, and this value is in cubits. When you add the corner slope and the base, we have a value of 858. And third, when you add the height and half base, you arrive at the value of 500. And when you proportionally set those values next to each other, they reflect the proportions between a foot, a cubit, and a meter. So those proportions are embedded into the very structure of the Great Pyramids. Moreover, those three units of measure are interrelated and derivable from the Euler mathematical constant E, 2.718, and pi, that is 3.141. And implications of this are far-reaching. As it turns out, they are not arbitrarily invented, but discovered, and can be regarded as universal units of measure, or archetypal units of measure, embedded in the very structure of reality. And this is a very important point to proceed further. And if you are interested, I refer you to the work of a mathematician, Green, who discovered this amazing fact. Therefore, we can apply those units of measure and discover many intentional patterns encoded within this structure. Let's start with the height of the Great Pyramid. It is disputable whether the Great Pyramid was ever topped with a pyramidion. In our times, the capstone, the pyramidion, looks as if it were missing. But there is also a possibility that the missing capstone was never there in the first place, and therefore was the intentional feature of the original design. Depending on whether we include the pyramidion or not, the height varies. Without the pyramidion, the height approximates 137 meters. With it, it would amount to approximately 146 meters. But for our calculations, we will take the height of 137 meters and discover its significance. And this is the height without including the pyramidion, the capstone. Importantly, the number 137 is a prime number, meaning it is divisible by number 1 and by itself. That is by 1 and 137. So for example, number 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 17 are primes. Prime numbers have a special place in mathematics and appear in many mathematical constants. They are the foundational numbers of sacred geometry. The number 137 is very special in this respect, as it is the 33rd prime number. Number 33 is of course related to Christ, as it marks the final year of his activity, of his death, resurrection, and final divinization of all creation. So having this in mind, let's look at the Acts, chapter 4, verse 11. And this is translated in the New King James Bible as, "This is the stone which was rejected by you builders, which has become the chief cornerstone." And translating Kephale and Gonias as the cornerstone is a common interpretation. However, in light of our reflections, we will see that it is in fact a misinterpretation, and the original King James Bible got it right as the head of the corner, because it refers to the capstone of the pyramidal structure. The head of the corner, the invisible top of the corner of the pyramid. And this capstone signifies the ineffable divine beyond being, from where all existence originates. So we could say that it is the divine spark of creation, embedded as a feature of the architectural masterwork of the Great Pyramid. And the top symbolizes the eye of God, which is the point of ascension and of emanation. Of course, there is a question whether this height is purely accidental. Therefore, let's look at the internal structure of the pyramid to see whether we can find a similar pattern. The so-called King's Chamber within the Great Pyramid has also embedded within its measurements the number 137. Famously, within this chamber, there is one piece of furniture, that is the red granite sarcophagus. Its volume in proportion to the volume of the rectangular chamber in which the sarcophagus is situated is again defined by the number 137. If we took the red granite sarcophagus and attempted to completely fill the room with such sarcophagi of equal volume by stacking them on top of and next to one another, it would take 137 sarcophagi. Or to put it another way, the volume of the sarcophagus is 137th of the volume of the King's Chamber. Therefore, this inner chamber is related mathematically to the total height of 137 meters of the Great Pyramid. And this conveys to us the idea of correspondence between microcosm of the inner chamber and the macrocosm of the entire Great Pyramid. This relationship is ruled by the number 137, which is the 33rd prime number. And the sarcophagus is, of course, related to the initiatory experiences of death and resurrection. The sarcophagus contains another mystery related to Christ, namely the Alpha and Omega symbolism etched into it. And this discovery was made by mathematician Robert Graham. He noticed that on the rim of the sarcophagus, there is etched the Alpha and Omega. And this Alpha and Omega is not etched in any random place, but between 30th and 33rd inch of the side of length of the sarcophagus. See, so there is Alpha and Omega etched between the 30th and 33rd inch of the rim of the sarcophagus. And this, of course, refers to 3 years of Christ's activity after the baptism in the Jordan River. But also this begs the question, how old is this etching and who put it there? Whoever did it must have been aware of the design and the mathematics of the pyramid. Regardless, we see that the pyramid is a building in which the Alpha and Omega and Christ symbolism is harmonically manifest on different levels. In its height, in the dimensions of the King's Chamber, and on the sarcophagus. We can go even further with this and discover even deeper connections to Christ if we consider the fact that the sexagesimal system can also be applied to analyze the architecture of the pyramids. Conventionally, it is believed that the sexagesimal system was invented by the Sumerians around 3500 BC. This numeral system, known also as base 60, was passed down from the Sumerians to the Babylonians, and is still used today for measuring time, angles, and geographic coordinates. Again, we will see that it features within the design of the pyramid. We should note that the ascending passageway leading up from the bottom of the pyramid to the king's chamber runs at an angle of 26.3 degrees. And the value ends off. This is the ascending passageway. The value of 26.3 degrees is highly significant. If we consider the geographic location of the Great Pyramid and connect it with the birthplace of Christ, Bethlehem, we will discover that the connecting line running northeast from the tip of the pyramid to Bethlehem runs at an angle of exactly 26.3 degrees. Thus, the line directed from the Great Pyramid at the angle of 26.3 degrees intersects with the birthplace of Jesus. It's quite amazing. And yesterday we heard about the view from above, like from the Platonic space being projected onto the world. And perhaps this is a synchronicity, but yeah, quite amazing. And this discovery was made by a physicist, David Seridas, so credit goes to him. But let's carry our reflections further and reflect on the nature of light that is related both to Christ and the Great Pyramid, and see whether we can draw further conclusions as to their similarities. When we take a look at the cross-section of the Great Pyramid, and how do I change the slides? Okay.
Now, well, then we're on mute.
No, we're not. My laptop's on.
Oh, you're on.
Okay, so let's carry our reflections further and reflect on the nature of light that is related both to Christ and the Great Pyramid. So when we take a look at the cross-section of the Great Pyramid, we see that its slope angle is equal to 51 degrees and 51 minutes. That is 51.84 in decimal value. And the slope angle indicates that it is a golden root triangle. Golden root triangle has a hypotenuse of equal to 5, 1.618, a side equal to square root of 5, 1.272, and the second side equal to 1. And this is a very special triangle. It has encoded within it significant mathematical constant of 5, that is the divine proportion. And the cross-section of the Great Pyramid conforms to this shape. I will only mention in passing now that according to Plato, the triangular, the tetrahedral shape is associated with the element of fire. And fire is considered to be the most light-like of all classical elements. And the Great Pyramid contains references to light on many levels. In fact, its name points us to the fact that it is the measure of light. I mentioned that Osiris is related to the Great Pyramids because he is the Ka of the Great Pyramids of Giza. That is their spiritual essence. Mythologically, the son of Osiris who avenges him and brings him resurrection is Horus. Horus is considered to be the principle of light in ancient Egypt. In terms of spiritual psychology, Horus signifies an enlightened state of consciousness in which the inner essence of an initiate becomes one with the radiance of Horus. Therefore, mythologically, Osiris is closely connected to the notion of light. Now, looking at the design of the Great Pyramid, we find mathematical and geometric principles referring to light. Again, the geographic location of the Great Pyramid itself is a proof of this. The Great Pyramid is located at the latitude of 29.9792458 degrees north. By comparison, the speed of light in meters per second is 299,792,448. And this, of course, we can assume is purely coincidental. But what if its longitude also contains a reference to the diameter of the sun and the speed of light, but in miles per second? This longitude is 31.1 342 degrees east. If we take this value and divide it by 360, the total angular value of the circle, we get 0.0864. And the value of 864 is an archetypal referent, the sun and light. Why? Because the diameter of the sun is approximately 864,000 miles. So in sacred geometry, the number 864 is associated with light and sun. And I should also note that when we consider numbers imaginally in terms of sacred geometry and arithmetics, we can look at them, on them as a language of correspondences. That is to say, we can move freely a decimal point without numbers losing their quality. What is important here is not the exact value, but an archetypal principle of a number. We can multiply or divide a value by 10, 100, 1,000, etc. In that way, whatever value we arrive at, for example, 0.0864, 864, or 864,000, this value will still contain an archetypal referent, in our case, the number 864. These different values are harmonically interrelated by their referent. In that way, we can scale phenomena infinitely, but the irreducible pattern remains the same, and nature functions in this way. It follows or conforms to the same patterns of creation on different levels or planes of reality, thus revealing their correspondence. Also, we must be aware that nature always approximates these ideal values, so there will always be a slight deviation from the ideal. This method seeks to explore qualities of numbers rather than exact quantities. And in the Great Pyramid, both qualitative and quantitative measurements play a role in complementing each other. To continue our reflections, I would like to mention again that the cross-section of the Great Pyramid reveals to us the golden root triangle. When we take its angular decimal value of 51.84 degrees and multiply it by 360, that is by the total angular value of the circle, we arrive at the number 18,662.4. And this value, again, corresponds harmonically and qualitatively to the speed of light in miles per second. Quite astonishing. That is to the 186,400 miles per second. Again, we come across the same archetypal referent of 864 related to speed of light and time. And I think we are all aware of the saying of Jesus in John 8, I am the light of the world. And so I would like to conclude with some questions that the pyramids present us with a riddle. Some amazing synchronicities are involved, and we should perhaps rethink the notion of evolution of consciousness, whether the ancients were really incapable of logical linear thinking, or whether we are projecting our mentality also onto the pyramids. I'm not exactly sure what is happening here, but it's quite mind-boggling, to be honest. So it's a challenge to us and to Rudolf Steiner. And yeah, I will finish with this. Thanks.
So, now that we have been initiated into the secrets, do any of the adepts have any questions?
Over here.
I thought it's well, of course, in the tradition we see such way of thinking all the time, and in Philo Judaeus, the Timaeus, of course, in Philo Judaeus, and the church fathers, and not in Plotinus, but
Iamblichus.
yeah. So, and also, of course, Ficino. Well, I thought it was a very Ficinian presentation with the emphasis on Egypt, of course, and but I think it's quite bold of you to present this in at our time. Of course, we are a specific crowd of people here open to such things, but it's still, I think it's quite brave. But my question would be, so because you suggest that it's a kind of spiritual exercise, it doesn't only potentially tell us something about reality, that reality was ordered towards the incarnation. That's fine. That's the truth. But the question is how we can use this, especially if we are not talented mathematicians like myself. How can we use it to meditate? Or because geometry, I understand the visualization, but all these numbers, do you think it can be a part of spiritual exercise?
Spiritual discipline. I think so. I can only speak from my own experience, and I've been interested in this topic, in the architecture of ancient Egypt and cathedrals for quite some time. And I found that it activates something in consciousness, like working with it. But for me, the most effective exercise was simply drawing stuff by hand.
So geometry more than arithmetic.
Yeah, for me personally. But I think there is a tremendous value in arithmetics, and it's ultimately complementary.
Because geometry involves imagination, unlike, I think, arithmetic, right? So
there's a way to imaginatively approach numbers. I attempted to do it a very short version by exemplifying the number 864, which could manifest in different planes of reality. So there is a way of reading mathematics that's a language, and it engages your imagination for sure. But there's always the question whether we should focus on simply qualitative elements of numbers or quantitative, and there's always a tension between them. But regarding the Pythagorean discipline, the old way was simply to have a compass and the ruler without measurements, without any indications of whether you can arrive at the right angles. So it simply required you to use your mind and your eyes and to attempt to align the ruler perfectly. So by developing some perhaps new organs of perception portion. So this is the old Pythagorean way, I think.
Gentleman at the end has a question for me.
Andrew Jackson.
Has anyone tried to test whether it's a coincidence by checking dimensions and ratios of other famous buildings around the world?
Actually, this is just a tip of the iceberg, because the pyramids of Giza connect to every other pyramid across the world. So even, it's really, what I present is only like a fraction. This presentation would go on for hours. The pyramids connect to Stonehenge, to the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico, to pyramids in China, and this is all based on the geometry involved.
That's not what I meant. What I meant was taking ordinary buildings that have no spiritual significance at all, Empire State Building or something. AI could probably do this quite quickly. You could do all sorts of ratio calculations and see how many of them correspond to the diameter of the sun, the distance of Venus from you may well get lots of interesting coincidences. So, and in that way, you could do a statistical test to see whether it's a coincidence.
Yeah. But if there are one structure contains 200 coincidences, are they all coincidental?
How do you know that there aren't 200 in Empire State Building?
It's a good question. I don't think every stable reflects the dimension of the sun, but of course we have to check it and apply proper methodology. And of course I'm open to this and would love to do this, having the knowledge and how to proceed, for sure. But it's a good point.
Yeah, thank you. I think actually my question follows on from that in a sense. I was thinking about art historians. I think of Rudolf Arnheim, his writings on symbolic form in art, and a book he wrote which was based on Gestalt psychology called The Power of the Center, where he submits, an analysis to a whole range of art historical images, structures to this geometrical study, and relates that to a kind of ordering principle which is innate within the human perception. But the related point I was thinking on that is to what degree, if we look at the idea of proportion and geometry and kind of systematicity, if you want to call it that, in art, to what degree is it done intuitively? To what degree is it done with some measure of planning or forethought? And that in itself relates secondarily to the Steinerian, Barfieldian evolution of consciousness question, because if you follow that arc, that says, let's say Barfield's version, that in some sense the construction of this object would have been done in a more inspirational capacity, by which it would have been somehow more daimonically received, as it were. But in the Barfieldian sense, it would be done with a more willing or conscious sense of intention as an imaginative act. So, yeah, I just wonder how that fits within the Steiner evolution of consciousness argument about what an artist or architect does.
Yeah, exactly. This is also, I have this question in mind still. I don't have a clear answer. Steiner says that the Egyptians and the people of previous ages of history had this imaginative consciousness, that they did not have the logical linear thinking as well as developed as we did. So while discovering those correlations inside the Great Pyramid, what was the state of consciousness of people who attempted to construct it or design it? So it's like a huge mystery. Yeah, but I would think about it perhaps one day.
But it's almost like that sense in which you arrange some things and you go, no, that's right. So there's some kind of instant of intuition where that sense of intuiting what is ordered or right, or whether that's how a mark is made on a piece of paper or how objects are assembled or something of this kind. So there's an argument there that insofar as it was seen, it was intuited correctly, let's say, rather than thought out.
Yeah, by means of scruples.
Yeah. So they're one and the same thing, but approached
from a different.
Yeah,
exactly.
something like that. Yeah.
This is my fault exactly as well.
Yeah.